Rahim was a simple man who lived in a small town where life moved slowly, and dreams often stayed only as dreams. He was a mechanic by profession, though he had never studied in any school of engineering. He learned everything with his own hands, watching, practicing, and failing many times before becoming good at fixing broken vehicles. His garage was not fancy. It was just a little tin-roofed place with old tools, rusty shelves, and the smell of engine oil mixed with sweat. Most people passed by without even noticing it, but those who came to him knew that Rahim worked with honesty. Life had not been kind to him. He had lost his parents at a young age, and since then he had no one to depend on. From childhood, he struggled for every meal, every coin, every bit of survival. He lived in a single small room beside the garage, where the walls were cracked and the fan above his head made a loud noise every night. Still, he was grateful for it. For him, having a roof over his head was better than sleeping under the open sky, something he had experienced in the past when he was completely alone. Every morning before the sun rose, Rahim would open his garage. He had only a few customers each day, sometimes one or two motorbikes to repair, sometimes a car with a punctured tire. He worked hard, often covered in grease, with his clothes permanently stained. People who knew him often said that Rahim had golden hands because he could bring life back to almost any broken engine. But golden hands did not mean a golden life. His earnings were small, and after paying for food, rent, and a few basic things, nothing was left. He often ended the day with only a cup of tea and some bread. Rahim's dream was never about becoming rich. He only wanted peace, respect, and maybe one day a family of his own. But years passed, and he remained alone. At times, loneliness hurt him more than poverty. In the evenings, after work, he would sit outside his garage, watching people passing by, families laughing, children playing, friends sharing food. He wished he had someone to talk to, someone who would ask him how his day was. But Rahim had nobody. He had learned to hide his pain behind a quiet smile, the kind that people notice but never question. Despite his struggles, Rahim was known in the neighborhood as a kind-hearted man. Whenever he saw a hungry child, he would share his meal even if it meant sleeping without food. Once, he even repaired a poor man's rickshaw for free, knowing the man could not afford to pay. Rahim believed that kindness always returned in some way, even if life felt unfair. Deep in his heart, he carried hope that someday something good would happen, something that would change his fate. The days in the garage were long. The noise of tools, the burning sun, and the heavy smell of oil often made him tired. Yet, there was something comforting about his work. Fixing broken things gave him a strange sense of purpose, almost like fixing the broken parts of his own life. Every time he tightened a bolt or started an engine that refused to start before, he felt a little proud, like he had won a small battle. But still, Rahim's nights were empty. He would lie on his old bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the whirring fan. Sometimes, memories of his childhood came back to him, the days when he played with his mother in the courtyard, the warmth of her hug, and the gentle advice of his father. Those memories often brought tears to his eyes, but he quickly wiped them away, reminding himself that crying would not change anything. He had to stay strong because life gave him no choice. His garage was his whole world, and his only companion was a stray cat that often came by to sleep near the old tires stacked in the corner. Rahim would feed the cat with little pieces of bread or leftover food. Strangely, he felt comfort when the cat was around. It was the only living soul that seemed to stay by his side without expecting anything in return. On weekends, when most people enjoyed their rest, Rahim worked even harder, hoping to earn a little extra. But no matter how much effort he put in, the money was never enough. Still, he never thought of giving up. He told himself that as long as he had his hands and strength, he could survive. Giving up, in his mind, meant disrespecting the struggle of his parents who had once fought to give him a better life. One evening, As the sky turned orange with the setting sun, Rahim sat outside his garage, wiping his greasy hands with an old rag. He looked at the road where vehicles rushed past. For a moment, he wondered what his life would look like 10 years later. Would he still be sitting in the same place, covered in grease, waiting for customers? Or would something change? He had no answer. He sighed deeply and stood up to close the garage for the day. The air that evening was heavy with the smell of rain. Dark clouds gathered above, and Rahim knew a storm was coming. He hurried inside to put away his tools and cover the vehicles left for repair. The sound of thunder echoed in the distance, and soon raindrops began to fall, tapping on the tin roof. Rahim sat on his small stool, sipping his last cup of tea for the day, listening to the rain's rhythm. There was a strange loneliness in the sound, almost like it was singing the story of his life, simple, quiet, and unnoticed. Rahim had no idea that this evening was not going to be like the others. The rain would not just wash the dust off the roads, it was about to bring something unexpected into his life. Something that would test his kindness, shake his routine, and change the way he looked at his future. At that moment, he was just a poor mechanic, unaware that fate was about to knock on his door in the most unusual way. The rain outside grew heavier, striking the tin roof of Rahim's garage like thousands of tiny drums. The sound echoed in the quiet space, filling it with an almost haunting rhythm. Rahim leaned back on his stool, tired from the long day, sipping the last drops of his tea. His body was exhausted, but his mind was restless as usual, thinking about tomorrow, about how to manage his earnings, about whether he would get any customers the next day. He was lost in these thoughts when suddenly, in the middle of the rain's noise, he heard something faint, so faint that at first, he thought his tired ears were playing tricks on him. It was a weak, trembling voice. Just one word, help. Rahim froze. He listened again carefully, trying to separate the sound from the loud rainfall. After a few seconds, he heard it again, slightly clearer this time, carried by the wind. It was not his imagination. Someone was out there, calling for help. His heart began to beat faster. He quickly stood up, his eyes scanning the dimly lit area around his garage. The rain blurred everything outside, and the street lights flickered weakly, casting long shadows on the wet ground. He stepped out into the rain, his feet splashing in the shallow puddles. The cold water soaked his worn-out slippers, but he didn't care. He followed the direction of the faint sound, his ears sharp and his eyes searching every corner. Then, near the side of the garage where a pile of old tires and scrap metal lay, he saw something that made him stop. A small figure was curled up on the ground, half hidden by the shadows. He rushed forward, his heart pounding. As he got closer, he realized it was a young girl, drenched from head to toe, her clothes clinging to her small frame, her face pale and shivering. She was trying to lift herself, but her body was too weak. She whispered again, help, before her voice broke into silence. Rahim immediately bent down beside her. Hey, are you all right? Can you hear me? He asked, his voice soft but urgent. The girl barely opened her eyes, her lips trembling as if she wanted to speak but couldn't. Without wasting another second, Rahim gently lifted her in his arms. She was light, almost weightless, and he could feel her trembling against his chest. Carefully, he carried her inside the garage, shielding her from the heavy rain. Once inside, he quickly placed her on the old wooden cot he kept in the corner of the garage. The cot was rough and simple, but it was the only place he could think of for her to rest. He grabbed a dry cloth and hurriedly wiped the rainwater from her face and hands. Her skin was cold, and she looked like she hadn't eaten properly for days. He ran to the small cupboard where he kept his belongings and pulled out a thin blanket. Covering her with it, he whispered softly, "Don't worry, you are safe now." Rahim's mind was racing. Who was this girl? Why was she lying outside his garage in the middle of a storm? And why did she look so weak and lost? But he pushed those questions aside for the moment. What mattered most was making sure she was all right. He lit the small gas stove he used for cooking and boiled some water. He made a cup of tea, added extra sugar, and then brought it to her. Gently, he lifted her head and helped her take a few sips. The warmth of the tea seemed to give her a little strength. Slowly, her shivering lessened, though her eyes still carried fear and exhaustion. "Thank you," she whispered faintly, her voice so soft that Rahim had to lean close to hear it. "You don't need to thank me," Rahim replied with a gentle smile. "Just rest. You are safe here." For the next few hours, Rahim sat beside her, checking her every few minutes. The rain continued outside, but inside the garage, there was a strange stillness. He felt a responsibility he had never felt before. For years, his life had been about fixing machines, but now, for the first time, he was trying to fix something far more delicate, a human life in distress. As the night grew deeper, the girl slowly opened her eyes wider. She looked around the garage, at the tools hanging on the walls, the smell of grease, the dim light of the single bulb. Then her eyes returned to Rahim, filled with curiosity and hesitation. Where am I?" she asked weakly. "You're in my garage," Rahim answered softly. "I found you outside. You were hurt and weak. I couldn't leave you there in the rain." The girl's eyes glistened with tears. She tried to sit up, but Rahim gently stopped her. "Don't push yourself. Just rest." For a moment, she stayed quiet, as if deciding whether to trust him. Then, in a broken voice, she whispered her name. "My name is Aisha." Rahim nodded. "All right, Aisha. Don't worry. You're safe here. I won't ask you anything you're not ready to tell me. Just know you can stay here until you feel better." Hearing his words, Aisha's tears slipped down her cheeks. She wasn't used to kindness from strangers. She clutched the blanket tightly around herself and closed her eyes again, finally allowing her body to rest. Rahim sat back on his stool, watching her carefully. He had many questions swirling in his head. Why was this girl out in the storm? What had happened to her? Where was her family? But he decided not to ask yet. Trust was not built in a moment. He understood that sometimes, silence could give more comfort than questions. The rain slowly began to fade, leaving behind the smell of wet earth. Inside the garage, the only sounds were the ticking of the clock and the girl's slow, steady breathing as she slept. Rahim felt a strange peace wash over him. For years, his nights had been lonely and quiet, filled only with his thoughts and the creak of the old fan. But tonight was different. Tonight, there was someone else in his little world, someone who needed him, and that gave his tired heart a sense of purpose he had never felt before. He stayed awake most of the night, making sure she was comfortable, checking if she had a fever, adjusting the blanket when she moved. In those quiet hours, Rahim realized that life had just taken an unexpected turn. He didn't know who this girl really was or what her story might be, but he felt deep inside that her arrival was not a random accident. It was as if fate itself had brought her to his garage on that stormy night. And though he didn't yet know how, Rahim sensed that his life was about to change forever. The morning sun entered the garage through the small cracks in the tin walls, spreading a soft golden light inside. Rahim rubbed his eyes, feeling the stiffness in his neck from sitting all night on the stool. He had barely slept because he kept checking on Aisha, afraid that her fever might rise or she might need something. When he looked at her now, she was still sleeping, but her face looked calmer than the night before. The blanket was pulled tightly around her, and for the first time, she looked a little at peace. Rahim quietly stood up and began his usual morning routine. He opened the garage doors to let in fresh air, arranged his tools, and boiled some water on the stove. The smell of tea filled the garage, mixing strangely with the usual odor of engine oil. He placed a cup of tea on the table near the cot, hoping that when Aisha woke up, she would have the strength to drink it. After some time, Aisha stirred. She blinked her eyes slowly, adjusting to the morning light. When she saw Rahim working silently at the other end of the garage, she seemed a little surprised, almost as if she had forgotten where she was. Slowly, she sat up, holding the blanket close to her. Rahim turned around and gave her a gentle smile. "You're awake. How are you feeling now?" he asked in his soft tone. Aisha looked down for a moment before whispering, "A little better, thank you." Her voice was still weak, but it carried more strength than the night before. Rahim nodded and pushed the cup of tea toward her. "Here, drink this. It will warm you up." She hesitated, then carefully reached for the cup. Her hands trembled slightly, and Rahim noticed it but didn't say anything. He just let her take her time. She sipped the tea slowly, and for a few moments, silence filled the garage, broken only by the distant sound of vehicles passing on the road. After finishing the tea, Aisha looked at Rahim, as if she was struggling with something inside. Finally, she spoke in a low voice. "Why did you help me? You don't even know me." Rahim paused, then smiled faintly. "Because you needed help. If I had left you outside in the rain, who knows what would have happened to you. Sometimes we don't need to know someone to do the right thing." His simple words touched her. She lowered her eyes, unable to reply, but inside she felt a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. For days, maybe even weeks, she had felt like no one in the world cared for her. And now, here was a poor mechanic, living in a small garage, who treated her with more kindness than she ever expected. As hours passed, Rahim continued working on a motorbike that had been left for repair. Aisha watched him quietly from the cot. His hands were rough and covered with grease, but the way he handled the tools showed his patience and skill. She noticed how carefully he tightened each bolt, how focused he was, as if fixing that machine was the most important thing in the world. Something about his dedication made her curious. He looked poor, his clothes old and worn, but there was dignity in the way he carried himself. Finally, she gathered the courage to speak again. "Do you live here, all alone?" she asked softly. Rahim stopped for a moment, then nodded. "Yes. This garage is my home and my workplace. I don't have a family anymore. It's just me." Aisha's heart sank a little at his answer. She could see the loneliness in his eyes, though he tried to hide it behind his calm smile. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable though, it was a silence that carried understanding. Later in the day, Rahim prepared a simple meal: bread, lentils, and some tea. He placed a plate in front of Aisha and encouraged her to eat. At first, she hesitated, but hunger won over her hesitation, and she ate slowly. Each bite seemed to give her back a little more strength. Watching her eat, Rahim felt a strange satisfaction, as if he had done something truly meaningful. He didn't have much in his life, but sharing what little he had with her felt right. As days passed, Aisha began to recover. Her wounds healed slowly, and her strength returned bit by bit. She still didn't share much about herself, but Rahim didn't press her with questions. He simply offered her a safe space to rest. During the evenings, when work slowed down, they sometimes talked. Aisha asked him about his childhood, about how he became a mechanic. Rahim spoke honestly, telling her about the struggles, the hunger, the long nights of loneliness. She listened quietly, sometimes with sadness in her eyes, sometimes with admiration. One evening, as the sun was setting, Aisha finally opened up a little about herself. She told Rahim that she had been through a difficult time, that she had lost someone close and felt like she had no place to go. Her words were broken, and she avoided giving details, but Rahim didn't ask for more. He just nodded gently and said, "Sometimes life feels heavier than we can carry. But believe me, no storm lasts forever. The sun always comes back." His words stayed in her heart. She realized that Rahim, despite living such a hard life, still carried hope inside him. It was something she had almost lost. The bond between them grew silently, like a seed taking root in the soil. Aisha began to help him in small ways around the garage. She would sweep the floor, hand him tools, or make tea when he was tired. Though Rahim never asked her to do anything, she insisted, saying she wanted to repay his kindness. Every time she helped, Rahim smiled, and the garage felt less lonely. For the first time in years, Rahim felt like he had someone by his side. It wasn't just about having company, it was about being seen, being valued. Aisha didn't treat him like a poor mechanic. She treated him like a human being who mattered. That simple respect was something Rahim had longed for without even realizing it. As the nights passed, their conversations grew deeper. They talked about dreams, about what life could be if things were different. Aisha confessed that she wanted a life where she could feel free, where she wasn't trapped by others' decisions. Rahim, on the other hand, admitted that his dream was simple: to have a stable garage, enough work to survive, and maybe one day a family that made him feel complete. Though their lives had been completely different, their hearts carried the same emptiness: the desire for belonging, for love, for peace. And so, in that small garage filled with old tools, broken engines, and the smell of oil, two lonely souls found comfort in each other's presence. It wasn't planned, it wasn't expected, but it was real. Each day they spent together built a silent bond, a bond that neither of them spoke of, but both felt deeply inside. Rahim often thought to himself, why did fate bring her here, to me, on that stormy night? He didn't have the answer, but he no longer cared. All he knew was that for the first time in years, his life felt less empty. And though he didn't yet know her full story, he sensed that their connection was going to change both of their lives in ways neither of them could imagine. Days passed quietly in Rahim's small garage, and Aisha was slowly regaining her strength. Her face, once pale and weak, now showed a soft glow, and her eyes no longer carried the same heavy fear. She still spoke little about her past, but Rahim could see that she was fighting with herself inside, carrying secrets she wasn't yet ready to share. He never forced her to speak. His nature was patient, and he believed that when the right moment came, she would open her heart. One afternoon, while Rahim was fixing a car engine, Aisha sat nearby, holding a cup of tea. She was watching him carefully, almost as if she was studying the details of his life. After a long silence, she finally spoke. You know, Rahim, you have been kinder to me than anyone else has been in a very long time. I don't even know how to thank you. Rahim smiled faintly without looking up from his work. You don't need to thank me, Aisha. Sometimes life brings people together for a reason. Maybe I needed someone to talk to as much as you needed someone to care for you. His words touched her deeply. She looked down, hiding the emotions in her eyes. She had always been surrounded by people who measured everything in money, status, and power. And yet here was a man who had almost nothing, but gave her more than anyone else ever had: genuine care without expecting anything in return. That evening, as the two of them shared a simple meal of bread and curry, Aisha finally gathered the courage to speak about her past. Her voice trembled as she began. Rahim, there's something you should know about me. I am not who you think I am. I belong to a very different world than this. Rahim looked at her calmly, giving her the space to continue. My father is a wealthy businessman, she said slowly. Our family owns companies, big houses, cars, everything people dream of. But that world is not as beautiful as it looks from outside. Behind the walls of wealth, I was trapped in a life that never felt like mine. I was expected to live the way they wanted, not the way I wanted. Every step, every decision of mine was controlled. And when I lost someone very dear to me in a sudden accident, I felt completely suffocated. I ran away because I couldn't bear it anymore. Her words spilled out like water breaking through a dam. She wiped her tears as she continued, "When you found me that night, I had nowhere to go. I didn't care where I ended up, I just wanted to escape that cage. I thought maybe I would disappear quietly, and no one would even notice. But you didn't turn me away. You gave me shelter, food, and kindness. Something I never found even in my own house filled with luxury." Rahim listened silently, his heart heavy with the pain in her words. When she finished, he placed his hand gently on the table and said, "Aisha, you don't need to explain everything to me. What matters is that you are safe now. I don't care about where you come from or who your father is. Here, you are just Aisha, and that is enough." His simple response broke down the walls around her heart. She felt a deep respect for this poor mechanic who valued her not for her wealth or her family name, but simply for being human. But Rahim also knew that her family must be searching for her desperately. He had seen enough posters and news on the streets about missing daughters of wealthy families to understand how serious such matters could be. For a brief moment, the thought crossed his mind, if her family discovered she was with him, they might misunderstand. They could think he had hidden her for money or some other reason. It could put him in trouble. But then he looked at Aisha's tired face and decided that protecting her peace was more important than protecting himself. The next few days were filled with quiet companionship. Aisha helped Rahim more actively now, cleaning the garage, preparing meals, and even learning how to handle some tools. She laughed for the first time in weeks when Rahim clumsily burned the bread while trying to cook. That small moment of laughter filled the garage with a warmth that even the sunlight could not bring. One night, as they sat under the dim bulb, Rahim spoke honestly. "Aisha, I know you are running from something, but you can't run forever. Sooner or later, your family will find you. They will come searching because you are their daughter, and no parent can forget their child. When that happens, you must be ready." Aisha lowered her head, silent for a long time. Finally, she whispered, "I'm scared, Rahim. Scared that they will take me back to the same life, the same cage. I don't want to go back." Rahim looked at her gently. "I understand your fear. But maybe facing them will not be as terrible as you imagine. Sometimes we need to step back into the storm to find peace. And remember, you won't be alone this time. I'll be here for you." Those words gave her courage. For the first time, she felt that maybe she could face her family again, not as the broken girl who ran away, but as someone stronger, someone who had found her voice. And then, as if fate had been listening, everything changed a few days later. A black car stopped outside the garage. From the window, Rahim noticed a group of well-dressed men stepping out, their expressions serious and urgent. His heart skipped a beat. He knew immediately they weren't ordinary visitors. They asked the shopkeepers nearby if they had seen a young girl. As they approached the garage, Rahim felt Aisha's hand clutch his arm tightly. Her face had gone pale again, her eyes filled with fear. "They're here for me," she whispered, her voice shaking. Rahim stood in silence for a moment, his mind racing. He knew this was the moment she had been dreading. But instead of hiding her, he looked at her calmly and said, "Aisha, it's time. You need to decide what you want to do. If you want me to send them away, I will. But if you want to face them, I'll stand by your side." Her eyes filled with tears. She looked into his steady gaze and, for the first time, felt strong enough to face what she had run away from. Taking a deep breath, she nodded. "I'll face them. But, only if you stay beside me." Rahim gave a gentle nod. "I promise." As the men entered the garage and recognized Aisha, their expressions turned to shock and relief. They immediately reached for their phones, probably to call her family. Aisha stood quietly, clutching the edge of her scarf, her heart pounding. But she wasn't alone this time. Rahim stood next to her, his presence steady, like an anchor in the middle of a storm. And in that moment, Aisha realized something important. Running had brought her to Rahim, but facing her truth, with him beside her, was going to change her life forever. The air inside the garage felt heavy after the men recognized Aisha. Their voices were filled with urgency as they spoke into their phones, informing her family that she had been found. Aisha stood quietly, her fingers gripping the blanket she had been holding, her heart racing faster than ever before. For weeks she had lived in fear of this moment, imagining it as the end of her freedom. Yet, now that it had arrived, it didn't feel the way she thought it would. Because beside her stood Rahim, silent and steady, like a wall she could lean on. Within an hour, a convoy of expensive cars arrived outside the garage. The sound of their doors opening echoed down the street, and curious neighbors peeked out to see what was happening. A tall man stepped out from the middle car, his face pale and his eyes frantic with worry. Behind him came a woman with tears streaming down her cheeks. They rushed into the garage, and before anyone could say a word, the woman ran forward and pulled Aisha into her arms. "My daughter! My Aisha," she cried, hugging her tightly, as if she feared she might disappear again. Aisha's eyes filled with tears too, but they were not only from relief. They were mixed with fear, guilt, and confusion. She hugged her mother back, but her eyes kept glancing at Rahim, who stood silently in the corner, watching everything unfold. Her father stepped closer, his voice trembling. "Aisha, where were you? We searched everywhere. Do you have any idea how worried we were?" His tone was sharp but broken by emotion. Aisha lowered her eyes. She wanted to speak, but words failed her. It was Rahim who stepped forward and broke the silence. His voice was calm but respectful. "Sir, she was weak when I found her near my garage. She was injured and tired, so I brought her inside and cared for her. That's all. She needed rest." Her father looked at Rahim, studying his oil-stained clothes, his rough hands, his simple surroundings. For a moment, suspicion clouded his eyes, as though he wondered why his daughter had been living in such a place. But when he looked back at Aisha, who nodded gently as if confirming Rahim's words, his expression softened. "Thank you," her father said at last, his voice quieter. "Thank you for keeping her safe." The wealthy family wanted to take Aisha home immediately. They promised her comfort, care, and everything she had left behind. But as they prepared to leave, Aisha held Rahim's hand tightly. The men around her frowned at the sight, but Aisha didn't let go. She looked directly at her father with tears in her eyes. "Papa," she said softly but firmly, "this man saved my life. He treated me with kindness when I had nothing. Please don't ever think of him as just a poor mechanic. He is the reason I am standing here today." Her words shocked everyone in the room. For a few seconds, silence filled the garage. Rahim tried to gently pull his hand away, but Aisha held it tighter, showing her determination. Her parents exchanged glances, realizing that something had changed in their daughter. She was no longer the silent, obedient girl who followed every order. She had found strength during her time away, and that strength came from the man standing beside her. Her father cleared his throat and nodded slowly. "If he has helped you, then we owe him gratitude. Whatever you ask, my daughter, we will respect." The family insisted Rahim come with them to their mansion as a guest, but Rahim politely refused. "This garage is my home. I don't belong in your world. I am happy here." His words were simple, but they carried dignity. He was not ashamed of who he was, and that honesty only deepened the respect in Aisha's eyes. Aisha left with her parents that evening, but her heart felt heavy as she looked back at the garage. She waved softly at Rahim, her eyes silently promising that this was not the end. Rahim stood by the door, watching her go, his heart torn between relief that she was safe and sadness that his little world had suddenly become empty again. Days turned into weeks. Rahim returned to his routine, fixing cars, repairing motorbikes, eating simple meals, and sleeping alone in his tiny room. But something had changed inside him. The silence of the garage felt louder than ever. The cot in the corner looked emptier, the evenings longer. He missed Aisha's laughter, her voice, even the way she handed him tools clumsily while trying to help. He tried to convince himself that their worlds were too different, that she belonged to a life far away from his reach. But in his heart, he couldn't forget her. Then, one morning, everything changed again. A luxurious car stopped outside his garage, and to his surprise, Aisha stepped out. She was dressed simply this time, without the expensive jewelry or clothes of her world. Her eyes were filled with determination. Rahim froze, unsure of what to say, but she smiled and walked toward him. "Rahim," she said softly, "I told you I wouldn't forget you. My life may be different, but that doesn't mean I can't decide who I respect, who I trust. My family knows now what you did for me. They don't see you as just a mechanic anymore. They see you as the man who gave their daughter a second chance." Rahim shook his head gently. "Aisha, you don't need to do this. Your world and mine are not the same. People may not understand." Aisha's eyes glistened. "Maybe they won't understand. But I do. And that is enough." Her words gave Rahim a feeling he had never known before. For years he had lived in loneliness, believing he was invisible to the world. But now, someone had not only seen him but valued him. In the days that followed, Aisha's family visited the garage again, this time not with suspicion but with respect. They offered to help Rahim expand his small business. With their support, his garage was rebuilt into a proper workshop with better tools, brighter lights, and more space. Customers began to flood in, and Rahim finally earned the dignity he had always dreamed of. But more than money, more than the new workshop, what mattered most to Rahim was the bond he had with Aisha. Their friendship grew stronger, built on trust and gratitude. She visited often, sometimes to bring him food, sometimes just to sit and talk while he worked. And every time she came, the lonely garage that once echoed with silence now echoed with laughter and warmth. Rahim realized that fate had given him something far greater than he had ever imagined. He didn't just repair broken engines anymore, he had been part of repairing a broken heart, and in the process, his own heart had healed too. The story of a poor mechanic and a girl who arrived in his life on a stormy night spread quietly in the town. People admired Rahim not just for his skill, but for his honesty, kindness, and the way he valued humanity above everything else. For the first time, Rahim's name was spoken with respect, not pity. And though life was still simple for him, it was no longer lonely. Aisha's presence brought light into his world, and he knew that no matter how different their worlds had been, destiny had brought them together for a reason. The night she whispered help had not only saved her but had also saved him from a life of emptiness. In the end, Rahim's life was changed forever, not by wealth, not by luck, but by compassion and the bond he shared with someone who saw beyond his greasy hands and old clothes. And every evening, when the sun set and the garage doors closed, Rahim sat outside with a quiet smile, knowing that sometimes the smallest act of kindness could change the entire direction of a person's life.